Welcome to Craving the Heat, where desire takes the lead and every story leaves you wanting more. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments and keep up with our latest naughty stories. It was supposed to be nothing, just a conversation. I told myself that as I stood in the hallway outside Ethan's room, clutching the mug of tea I'd promised to bring him. He was my husband's closest friend and business partner, someone who had been in our home 100 times before. Someone who, up until a few months ago, I'd never looked at twice. But lately, there had been something. Small glances that lasted too long, words that felt weighted, a strange electricity when he passed me in the kitchen. I had tried to ignore it, convinced I was imagining it, but it had been creeping into my thoughts more than I wanted to admit. It was late in the evening. My husband had stepped out to take a call in the garden, his voice a faint hum through the open kitchen window. Ethan was upstairs, staying the night because of a late meeting the two of them had earlier. I could have just left the tea outside his door, knocked politely, and gone back downstairs. But my hand didn't stop on the handle. It turned. I stepped inside. The room was dim, lit only by the warm glow of a bedside lamp. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling through something on his phone. When he looked up, there was surprise in his expression, quickly replaced by something else, something I couldn't name but felt deep in my stomach. "Thanks," he said softly, taking the cup from me. His fingers brushed mine, and for a second, neither of us moved. I told myself to step back, to make some excuse and leave, but my body didn't obey. He set the tea down on the nightstand, and his eyes stayed on me longer than they should have. "You seem different tonight," he said quietly. I laughed it off, muttering something about being tired, but the way he was looking at me made my chest tighten. The air between us felt heavier, as if the room itself had shrunk. I realized how close I was standing to him, closer than was polite, closer than I'd ever stood before. When his hand reached for mine, I should have pulled away. I didn't. His thumb traced along my knuckles slowly, like he was testing how far I'd let him go. My heart was pounding so loudly I could hear it. I tried to think about my husband downstairs, the years we built together, the trust between. Ooh, but Ethan's eyes were holding mine, and in that moment, reason was nothing but a faint voice in the background. He stood, closing the small space between us. His scent was familiar, soap, cologne, and something warmer, and I felt my resolve slipping. His hand moved to my waist, light at first, almost tentative. "We shouldn't." I started, but the words came out weak. "I know," he whispered, but he didn't step back. Neither did I. It was like watching a glass tip over in slow motion. You see it happening. You know it's going to spill, but you don't reach out to stop it. His lips brushed my cheek, then lingered near my jaw, and the world outside that room fell away. My thoughts blurred into a mix of guilt and desire, the kind that feels dangerous precisely because it's forbidden. I don't know how long we stood like that, not saying anything, not moving apart. I only know that by the time I finally stepped back, my breathing was uneven and my hands were trembling. The tea on the nightstand had gone cold, untouched. We didn't speak as I left the room, but the look he gave me as I pulled the door shut was enough to tell me this wasn't the end. Something had shifted, and no matter how hard I tried, I wouldn't be able to pretend it hadn't happened. I told myself the next morning that it had been nothing. A mistake, maybe, or a moment of weakness that I could erase simply by ignoring it. But the truth was, the memory of standing in Ethan's room lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every detail stayed with me. The warmth of his hand, the way his eyes had softened, the quiet thud of my own heartbeat in my ears. I replayed it against my will, each time convincing myself it had been harmless, and each time feeling that same faint ache low in my stomach. 2 days later, he was back at the house. My husband had asked him to come by to discuss a pitch for an investor, and they worked in the study for hours while I tried to keep myself busy. Every so often, I heard his laugh from behind the door, deep and smooth, and it made my chest tighten. I avoided passing the study, afraid of catching his eye, afraid of what might flicker there. But when they finally emerged, and I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter, he was the one who appeared in the doorway. "Hey," he said, voice casual, but his gaze wasn't. "Can I borrow a glass of water?" It was such an ordinary request, yet the air between us felt loaded. I handed him the glass, careful not to let our fingers touch. He drank slowly, eyes holding mine over the rim, and I could feel the pulse in my throat. Later that night, when my husband stepped out to take another call, I found myself on the back patio, pretending to check the plants. Ethan was there, leaning on the railing, looking out at the yard. I could have gone back inside. I didn't. We talked about the weather, about his project, about nothing at all, but there was something under every word. When the silence came, it wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something that hummed between us, stronger than it had been in his room that night. Over the next week, it became a pattern. He'd drop by for meetings or to work on something with my husband, and somehow, in the smallest ways, we'd find ourselves alone. A look that lasted too long in the hallway, standing too close in the kitchen. The briefest brush of his arm against mine as we passed each other. None of it could be called outright betrayal, not yet, but each moment left me restless, my mind drifting toward him in the quiet hours of the night. Then came the evening, it shifted again. My husband had been called away for an unexpected dinner with a client. Ethan had stayed behind, claiming he still needed to finish some work. I was upstairs, folding laundry in the bedroom, when I heard him knock softly on the doorframe. He leaned there, one hand in his pocket, and asked if I had a stapler. It was absurd, a grown man asking for a stapler, but it was an excuse, and we both knew it. I found one in the drawer and handed it to him. He didn't take it right away. His fingers grazed mine, deliberately this time, and I felt the electricity rush through me so fast I had to catch my breath. "We keep doing this," I murmured before I could stop myself. His smile was small, almost sad. "I know, and I don't want to stop." The words sat heavy between us, and I knew in that moment that a line had been crossed. Not physically, not yet, but in intent. We were no longer pretending there was nothing happening. It was out in the open now, and that made it dangerous. In a way that thrilled and terrified me, the night stretched on with my husband gone and Ethan still in the house. Every sound made me hyper-aware of where he might be. When I finally went downstairs for a glass of wine, I found him in the living room, leaning back on the sofa, looking like he had all the time in the world. I almost turned around, but he saw me and patted the cushion beside him. I sat. He didn't touch me at first. He didn't have to. Just sitting that close, the heat from his body seeping into mine, was enough to make my pulse quicken. We talked in low voices, but neither of us remembered much of what was said. Then, slowly, his hand moved, brushing against mine on the cushion. Not by accident this time. When his fingers threaded through mine, I didn't pull away. My wine glass was abandoned on the coffee table, my heart racing with something that felt both inevitable and completely reckless. He leaned in just slightly, enough that I could feel his breath near my cheek. "If I kissed you right now," he began, but I didn't let him finish. I stood, breaking the moment, muttering something about needing to check the oven, even though it was empty. But as I walked away, I knew this was only getting harder to resist. And deep down, I wasn't sure I wanted to. The days that followed were an exercise in self-control, or the illusion of it. I moved through the house as if I could outrun the pull between us, avoiding lingering in rooms he might walk into, keeping conversations short, my hands busy with anything that kept them from trembling. But the truth was, I noticed everything. I noticed how he leaned in just a little when we spoke, like he couldn't help it. How his voice softened when he said my name. How his eyes never darted away, not even when they should dot. My husband was working later than usual, leaving the house quiet for hours at a time. I told myself it was dangerous to have Ethan here so often, but there was no reason to object. Not without drawing suspicion. So I let it happen. I let the little encounters build, each one more charged than the last. One evening, I was carrying a basket of laundry upstairs when I felt a presence behind me. I turned, and there he was, leaning casually against the wall. "You missed a step," he said with a faint smile. My heart skipped. "I'm fine," I replied, trying to brush past him, but he didn't move right away. For just a second too long, our bodies were close enough that I could feel his warmth. I stepped away before it became something more, but his scent lingered. As I climbed the stairs, the moment that changed everything came a week later. My husband was out at a conference in another city, staying overnight. I'd told myself I'd spend the evening quietly, maybe watching a movie, keeping the lights low and my phone far away. But when Ethan texted, "Forgot to grab a file, can I swing by?" my reply came faster than it should have. When he arrived, the house felt too big and too still. He stepped inside like he'd been here 1,000 times, and maybe in a way he had, at least in my thoughts. I handed him the file from the study, expecting him to leave right away, but he didn't. He looked at me for a long moment, like he was waiting for something. "You could stay for a drink," I heard myself say. My voice quieter than I intended. We sat on the sofa, the same one from that night weeks ago, glasses in hand. Conversation was easy, too easy, like we'd both stopped trying to hold up the pretense of restraint. At some point, his knee brushed mine. Neither of us moved away. "You know this is—" I began, but the words faltered when he leaned just slightly closer. "Wrong?" He finished for me, his voice low. "Yeah, I know." The pause between us was thick, the kind of silence that feels like it's about to break open. And then it did. His hand slid over mine, not tentative this time, but sure, as if we'd both been here in our minds long before tonight. I should have pulled away. Instead, I let him take my glass and set it on the table. His fingers lingered on my wrist before traveling up my arm, slow and deliberate. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the way his breath had shifted, deepened. "I thought about you," he murmured. More than I should. I didn't have to ask when or how often. I already knew because I had to. My hand found his jaw almost on instinct, my thumb brushing his cheek, and for the first time, we stopped pretending. His lips met mine in a slow, unhurried kiss, one that carried every unspoken thing we kept inside for weeks. It wasn't desperate, not yet, but it was certain. When he pulled back just enough to look at me, there was no going back. "I should go," he said. Softly, but he didn't move. I almost told him to. Almost. Instead, I let my hand slide down his chest, and the decision was made for both of us. The hours that followed blurred, not in a careless way, but in that strange, weightless feeling of finally stepping into something. You've been standing on the edge of for far too long. When I woke the next morning, the house was quiet again. He was gone, but a note sat on the coffee table. "This doesn't have to mean the end of us pretending." I stared at it for a long time, knowing that pretending would only get harder from here. And yet, the thought of stopping didn't feel like relief. It felt like loss. The note stayed on my coffee table for 3 days before I tucked it away in the drawer of my nightstand. I told myself I wasn't keeping it because it meant anything, but because I didn't want to throw it away where someone might see. That was a lie, of course. The next time I saw Ethan, it was in public, the grocery store, of all places. He was leaning over a cart, scanning a shelf, and for a moment I almost walked past without saying anything. But he looked up, spotted me, and the small smile that formed was enough to make my pulse trip. We exchanged casual greetings, all very normal. But as he passed me in the narrow aisle, his arm brushed mine, and under his breath he murmured, "You looked for me first." I wanted to say no, but I couldn't, because it was true. The small moments started again. 2 long glances. Messages that began under the guise of practical questions and ended with lines that lingered in my mind at night. And each time I thought I'd found the strength to step back, something pulled me forward. It happened again one rainy afternoon. My husband had called to say he'd be working late. Not unusual, not suspicious. Ethan came by under the pretense of returning a borrowed book. We stood in the doorway for a long while, talking, rain streaking the glass behind us. And then he stepped forward. This kiss was different from the first, quicker, hungrier, as if we were both afraid of losing. The nerve. I felt my back hit the wall as his hands framed my face, and for a moment, I forgot the world outside even existed. The sound of the rain, the faint scent of his cologne, the way his breath caught, it all folded into the moment until there. With nothing else stopped from that day on, we weren't careful anymore. We stopped timing our meetings with logic and started letting them happen when the pull was too strong to ignore. A text at lunch turned into a late afternoon visit. An errand across town became a detour past his place, but with the thrill came a creeping sense of danger. Twice, my husband called while Ethan was still in the house. Once, I swore I saw a neighbor watching from across the street. Every close call left me rattled, but also strangely exhilarated, as if the risk itself had become part of the addiction. The worst was the night of the dinner party. My husband was entertaining clients at home, and Ethan had been hired to assist with some technical equipment for a presentation. We barely exchanged words in front of everyone, but every time I passed him, my skin prickled with awareness. Later, as I walked down the hallway toward the kitchen, I felt his hand brush mine for the briefest second, a touch so subtle no one else could have noticed, but enough to send a rush of heat through me. That single moment made it impossible to focus for the rest of the evening. We found ourselves alone again a week later. The conversation was short, our eyes doing most of the speaking. I didn't ask him to stay, but I didn't tell him to leave either. When his hand found mine, I didn't pull away. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't going to fade quietly. The thing about lines is that once you cross them, they stop looking like lines at all. At first, I told myself Ethan was just a distraction, a spark I could hold in my palm without letting it burn me. But with each meeting, each glance, I realized the spark had already caught, and I was standing in the middle of a fire pretending I didn't feel the heat. Days became harder to navigate without thinking of him. Even the most mundane moments, washing dishes, folding laundry, would twist into daydreams of his hand brushing mine, his voice lowering when it was just the two of us. I'd startle myself out of it, scolding my mind, but the thoughts always crept back. One evening when my husband was away at a conference, Ethan texted, "You home?" I hesitated before replying, knowing what that one question really meant. But hesitation didn't win. By the time I opened the door, he was already walking up the steps, his hair damp from the drizzle outside. We didn't speak much that night. It was as though talking would have broken the fragile, charged air between us. Instead, we sat close on the couch, the TV playing some forgettable program neither of us was watching. I remember feeling his knee press lightly against mine and thinking how absurd it was that something so small could feel so seismic. Eventually, he shifted, turning toward me, and I knew there was no going back. The kiss wasn't urgent this time. It was slow, deliberate, a kind of quiet claiming. I could feel the unspoken admission in it. This was no longer a passing indulgence. This was something we'd both chosen, again and again, knowing what it meant. From then on, the in-between spaces of my life began to disappear. Every lull, every spare hour became a potential opening for him. My phone lit up with his name more often than anyone else's. I caught myself dressing differently, lingering in the mirror a few extra minutes before stepping out. Not for my husband, not for anyone else, but for him. The danger was part of the allure. We didn't have a plan, didn't talk about what this was. It was simply a thread running beneath everything else, pulling tighter and tighter as the weeks passed. Sometimes we'd exchange nothing but a look in public, a quick flicker of connection that somehow felt more intimate than anything behind closed doors. The closest call came one Sunday afternoon. My husband had just left for a quick errand when Ethan showed up unexpectedly, claiming he was just passing by. I should have told him to go. Instead, I invited him in, heart pounding. We didn't hear the car in the driveway until it was too late. Ethan slipped out the back door as my husband walked through the front, and I stood there in the kitchen, trying to act as though I hadn't just been holding someone else's hand minutes earlier. It was reckless. We both knew it, but neither of us stopped. If anything, the close calls only bound us tighter. The night it all nearly collapsed was during another of my husband's late work shifts. Ethan and I had planned nothing, but he texted, "I need to see you." That was all. When I opened my front door, he didn't wait, just stepped inside, closing it behind him, his eyes never leaving mine. This time, there was no small talk, no pretense. The way he reached for me felt different, heavier, as though he was pulling me towards something we couldn't return from. My hands found his without hesitation, my mind already past the point of negotiation. I think I knew, even as it was happening, that we were dangerously close to crossing into a place where the truth would come spilling out, whether we wanted it to or not. And still, I didn't move. It started with a look, the kind that lasts just a second too long but says everything words can't. Ethan's gaze lingered, searching my face as if he were memorizing it, and my chest tightened with the weight of it. There was no casual in the way he looked at me anymore. Every glance carried intent, a hunger that matched my own. When we kissed that night, it was no longer a test of boundaries. It was surrender. His hand came up to the side of my neck, fingers sliding into my hair, tilting my head just enough for him to deepen the kiss. My pulse raced so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out every thought that told me to stop. We moved like people who had been waiting far too long for permission. Every touch was deliberate. His palm trailed down my arm, fingertips brushing my skin as though mapping it, learning it. The way he whispered my name felt dangerous, not because anyone might hear, but because I wanted to hear it again and again until the sound became a part of me. I'd never been kissed like that before. Not rushed, not distracted, not out of routine. His mouth pressed against mine like the world might end if he let go. And maybe in some ways it did end. The life I'd known, neat, contained, obedient, was unraveling thread by thread. With every breath we shared. Later, we sat on the edge of the couch, our foreheads resting together, both of us breathing as though we'd run a mile. My hand rested against his chest, feeling the rapid beat beneath my palm. He caught it, pressing it tighter, as if to make me feel the truth in it, that he was just as caught in this as I was. We started finding excuses to see each other. Sometimes it was under the guise of helping me with a small project at home. Sometimes it was just because he happened to be nearby. But the truth was simpler. We couldn't stay away. Every meeting blurred the line between passion and necessity. It wasn't just desire anymore. It was the way he noticed the little things about me no one else seemed to see. The way he would brush a strand of hair back and smile faintly, as though that tiny gesture meant something monumental. The way his hand would rest lightly at my waist in a quiet kitchen, and it felt like the safest place in the world. One rainy evening, he showed up at my door without warning. His shirt was damp, his hair wet, his eyes lit with something that made my breath hitch. I stepped aside without a word, and he closed the door behind him, his presence filling the room like a storm about to break. He kissed me before I could speak, hard this time, almost desperate. My back found the wall, and his hands framed my face, his thumbs sweeping against my cheekbones, as though trying to memorize every curve and contour. I clung to him, not out of fear, but because letting go wasn't an option I wanted to consider. It was the kind of kiss that left you unsteady, the kind that made time vanish. When he finally pulled back, his forehead pressed against mine. We both stood there in silence, breathing the same air, neither willing to move first. From that night forward, there was no more pretending this was something we could walk away from. Passion had turned into something deeper, more dangerous. Not just a flame, but a fire with roots, burrowing under the life I'd built, threatening to pull it all apart. It couldn't last forever. Deep down, we both knew it. The more we fed this thing between us, the more it demanded, until it began to spill into places it shouldn't. Glances caught by strangers, conversations that lingered too long, touches that risked being seen. One late afternoon, the weight of it finally pressed in. We were at his place, the fading light turning the room gold. He sat across from me, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the floor. There was no anger in him, no regret, just the quiet acceptance that comes when you've reached the edge of something you can't cross without losing yourself completely. "I don't want to hurt you," he said softly, his voice rough. "You already have," I whispered, though the sting in my words was more truth than accusation. I had let him hurt me, and I'd hurt myself willingly. He came to sit beside me, his hand covering mine. For a moment, we just stayed like that, fingers laced, hearts heavy. There was nothing to fix, no right way to walk away from what we'd created. It wasn't that the feelings weren't real. They were too real.
That was the problem, when
I finally stood. He didn't stop me. He walked me to the door, and as I stepped out, he caught my wrist, just for a heartbeat, his thumb brushing against my pulse. No words passed between us. They weren't needed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet of a house that felt emptier than it had ever been. My phone stayed dark. No message.
No call?
The space he'd occupied in my life is already beginning to ache like a missing limb. But somewhere in that ache was the knowledge that what we'd had, however reckless, however forbidden, had been alive in a way few things ever were. And though it was over, I knew a part of me would always be standing in that doorway. His hand around my wrist, both of us caught in the impossible choice between letting go and holding on and in my heart. I knew we'd both chosen to let go. Before the fire consumed everything.